Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Geneviève Zubzitsky. I'm professor of sociology and director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia. And I have the pleasure to welcome you to this year's WCEE Distinguished Lecture by our visiting fellow, Dr. Yevgenia Albats. I'd like to thank the International Institute for making possible Dr. Albats' year-long fellowship at the University of Michigan, and Dr. Albats, of course, for accepting our invitation. Yevgenia Albats is a renowned Russian investigative journalist, political scientist, author, and radio host. She has an unusually distinguished and varied career. She graduated from Moscow State University in 1980 and received her PhD in political science from Harvard University in 2004. She has taught at Yale and Moscow's prestigious Higher School of Economics until 2011, when her courses were canceled because of a request from top Kremlin officials. Author of 4 books, Dr. Albats is also the editor-in-chief and CEO of the Moscow-based New Times, a Russian-language independent political weekly. And the New Times is an online-only publication since June of 2017, when Russian authorities prohibited its paper distribution and sales. She's also the host of Absolute Albats, I love the name, a radio talk show on Echo Moskvy, the only remaining liberal radio station in Russia, and she's broadcasting live from Ann Arbor every Monday, that radio show. So actually live from the campus of the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Dr. Albats is the recipient of several prestigious fellowships. She was the Alfred Friendly Press Fellow assigned to the Chicago Tribune in 1990, the Nieman Fellow at Harvard University in 1993, and the inaugural Fellow at Kelly's Writers House and Perry House at the University of Pennsylvania in 2017. Last but not least, she's our very own Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia Distinguished Fellow, as well as the inaugural International Institute Distinguished Faculty Fellow for 2019-2020. During her year here at Michigan, Dr. Albats is offering courses in the political science department. She's giving lectures in different departments and schools, most recently, a couple weeks ago, at the Ford School of Public Policy. And she's a very generous colleague, giving her time to faculty, students, and members of the Ann Arbor community. Just last week, when we were chatting, she asked me how she could admit students currently on the wait list for her current course. And when I told her that she didn't have to, that it was okay, her class was full, she told me, "What? But of course I want to let them in. How could I deny access to students who want to learn about populism in Eastern Europe? We must make room," and so we did. It is with that intellectual generosity and sense of civic duty that she reaches out to the Russian public against all odds and putting herself at risk to engage in open, direct discourse about politics and other pressing social issues in Russia. We're extremely lucky and proud to have her with us at the University of Michigan and to have her speak tonight about the last 30 years of media in Russia. Please join me in offering a very warm welcome to Dr. Yevgenia Albats. Thank you so much. I'm happy to have you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for coming. I understand it's already, it's time for the dinner here in Ann Arbor. And I'm real surprised that so many of you show up. I'm real glad to see my former students, my current students. I'm very glad to see famous names in Russian studies, in Soviet studies, in East European studies, all those names which I know by articles and books and literature reviews and etc. I'm also happy to see people whom I read my entire life, like Professor Suni or like Zvi Gittelman. Among us is a famous professor from Moscow, professor of Judaic study, the one who started the first Judaic department in the Moscow University, Professor Arkady Kovelman, who translated Babylonian Talmud into Russian and provided commentaries to it. So, I consider myself lucky to live at the same time that Arkady Kovelman is around. He's this sort of a genius. We just don't recognize sometimes that these people are around us. So I'm very grateful to all of you for your interest to my country, which is undergoing through another turmoil, and I know that everybody already sick and tired to hear Russia, Russia, Russia that, Russia once again did that, Russia annexed that, Russia threatened that. Now Russia threw away into a basket with dirt and rubbish its own constitution. So never boring country, trust me. That's why I love it so much, and I choose to live there, because you wake up in the morning and you really don't know where you find yourself by the end of the day, and that's amazing. I'm going basically to tell you the story of my life, because I've been in Soviet, international, and Russian journalism for the last 44 years of my life. And it is a great job, a job that allowed me to see the world, but also allowed me to think about very interesting problems. And I remember the first time I came to Harvard University in 1992 as an Eman Fellow, and I got to Widener Library, and there is Department D. It's the 4th floor underground. That's Department D, Russian desk, Russian and Soviet department. And I walked into this department and I just collapsed. There were books published before Russian Empire collapsed, after Russian Empire collapsed, books published in immigration, book published here in Ann Arbor, books by artists whom, were smuggled into the Soviet Union, and I was one of those recipients of this of the books that were published in this city. And why did you do what you do to artists? I still don't understand. It was still needed. So, and there were books that were impossible to buy in the Soviet Union back in Russia in 1992, and books which were published by Tamizdat, Samizdat, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember, I was looking around and I was thinking, God, I want my sleeping bag. I want to speak a couple of weeks here. So the Russian, I joined Russian media as a reporter, writing about all kind of crazy stuff. Because of my Jewishness, I couldn't write about any politics. And in general, my name was not exactly kosher for the Russian media, so for the Soviet media. So I got the lowest possible job as the secretary of the letter department in the Sunday supplement of Izvestia Недели. So my job was to answer letters of all the people who were writing to the newspapers, trying to figure out how to to make their life better. For some reasons, they believed that that was the way to do. But I started also writing about all kind of sciences, predominantly the history of the universe, microsciences, all these, sexy things like, neutrino, proton, ocean, and etc. So it was very, very, it was doomed to happen. So, doesn't matter. So, Soviet journalism, of course, there was no journalism. It wasn't journalism. it was, on the one hand, it was propaganda. On the other hand, it was all kind of Aesopic language that was trying to tell something readers in between the lines. It was a very specific tool to know how to read between the lines. For instance, I was writing about particles, and I was writing about neutrino. It's a particle which is impossible to catch. You just catch muon, whatever, it's just like whatever is left over from neutrino. Neutrino goes through the earth without, noticing any mass. So, and basically, for all my readers, it was understandable that I was talking about this revolutionary type people who were emerging in the Soviet environment. It's proton, its lifespan is 90.10, so it's like forever. And obviously, these was, sort of an image of the old Soviet timers who didn't allow for young people to live. Of course, Russia, until 1991, until Soviet Union collapsed, censorship was part of Russian life. It was part of Russian life during the Tsarist Russia. There were, at the beginning of the century, of the 20th century, there were 3,000 magazines and newspapers, of which 1,000 were in opposition to the Tsarist government. Still, they were coming out. In the communist Russia, in this great state of workers and peasants, censorship was introduced almost right away after the end of the Civil War. And then there were created, this special agency which was basically the part of the what then became known as NKVD and KGB, political police, which controlled everything. When I worked for Izvestia and, still as a secretary, but I already was a pretty well-known journalist, member of the Union of Writers, journalists, and, each and every article, my article had to go through the censor. Censor sat right in the same building. For instance, Nedelya was sitting on the 5th floor on Pushkinsky Square. Those of you who know Moscow, it's right downtown Moscow, and you see Pushkin. And of course, he reminds you about, censorship that existed back in the Tsarist times. So, and there was a very nice guy, I remember him as if it was yesterday, Serежа, and I was coming to him, and he had big books, big like that, and in these books there were lists of names of enterprises and names of individuals that could be mentioned. I couldn't mention Zoshenko, I couldn't mention Akhmatova. It was 1991, 1992, 1993, it's before, Brezhnev got dead, but already, physiology became the main vehicle of the Soviet politics because, all our leaders, they were well over 75, so, whether they had stool in the morning or not, that had a profound impact on the course of the Soviet domestic and foreign policy. So, and of course, they tend to be on the conservative side, right? I couldn't, when I wrote a feature story about the former Stalin's doctor, I couldn't write that he was imprisoned in 1937. I had to use this Aesopic language so that educated readers realized that, of course, he was taken away in 1937 not to have a breakfast on the bank of the Black Sea, but probably to Gulag in Siberia. So, I couldn't write. I was very interested in medical science connected to the space flights. I had this absolutely crazy idea that I was going to become an astronaut. I dreamed about going out there, and I was doing all kinds of, I already went down there, on the bottom of the Black Sea. I went all the way on top of Elbrus. Of course, they didn't allow me to go abroad, so I couldn't go anywhere else. But I thought that, of course, sooner or later I will become an astronaut. Right? So, and I was writing about the science. And it was very interesting. For instance, there was astronaut Grechka, and during his 90-day flight, his heart moved from left to right. It's a crazy little bit there. I could write about that. When I wrote, they kicked it out. I couldn't write that there was a fire on the orbit station. Just couldn't write about that. So, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My husband was a famous science writer, Yaroslav Golovanov, and he was trying to publish story of the very first group of Soviet cosmonauts, those who were trained with Gagarin and stuff, and because a couple of them ended up dead on the ground, not up there. So he was unable to publish it until in 1987, when Gorbachev himself, the then General Secretary of the Communist Party, gave a permission to publish this huge story that, of course, became a world sensation. But there was a special space censorship that didn't allow to publish all that. There was a special censorship in medical field that didn't allow to publish anything that had to do with medicine. AIDS were totally prohibited. Drugs didn't exist in the Soviet Union. AIDS, of course, that was was creation by the Pentagon, but still I interviewed the first AIDS guy in the country. He was a KGB guy who served in Kenya, happened to be gay, and got HIV. But I couldn't publish this because, of course, in the great Soviet states, HIV couldn't exist. As well as drug users, they did exist in the real life, but they didn't exist. As well as, lesbians or gays, they existed, apparently, among teachers, there was a study done by one of my friends. There were a lot of lesbians, but I couldn't write about this. So that was the state of journalism that existed by the time that Mikhail Gorbachev became the General Secretary of the Communist Party. And what he did, the most important part that he did, it is that he brought from Canada the long-time ambassador to Canada, Alexander Nikolaevich Yakovlev, who became the real proponent of openness. The idea was that in order to conduct reforms in the Soviet Union, and they knew already that we lost the Cold War, that economy in pieces, state bank totally empty, and et cetera, et cetera. It was already pretty well known by 1987, 86. So, and the idea was that in order to conduct economic reforms in the Soviet Union, you need to break the bone of the pillars of the system, and that was bureaucracy. And in order to deal with this communist bureaucracy, you have to bring out the energy of the people. People are going to demand reforms. They were, in fact, it was very, very, I interviewed Gorbachev many, many times. And their understanding was very easy. That, of course, you have to bring the energy of the people, and they are going to smash communist bureaucracy and KGB, and that's how, reforms will start. Soviets, and that's exactly what Putin is doing now, exactly what he's doing now. They use censorship in order to make everyone complacent, in order to make everyone responsible for whatever was going on in the country, for crimes, and there were plenty of crimes, for misery of the people, for the fact that every fourth baby was born with one or another mental deficiency, and etc. etc. So Putin is doing exactly the same. He wants everyone to be complicit. And that's why they use propaganda. Propaganda is not just methods to conceal some facts. Propaganda is an outlaw. It's just pure lie. They use it in order that people who live in the country will put their own energy and their own beliefs in the ends. It's not just to suppress them. It is to make them part of the gang. And that's, I love this quote from Hayek, apart from the fact that I love Hayek. But, I think it's very, very important what he said. It is essential that the people should come to regard them as their own ends. It's not just Brezhnev or Stalin or wanted this or another thing. It was people themselves wanted those ends. People themselves were interested in putting enemies of the state behind bars. People themselves were interested in executing those enemies of the state who were against our beloved Stalin. So that is very important tool that was used by the Soviet Union and is back. So now back in this lovely 1990s. This 1990s, when all of a sudden everything opened. When all of a sudden the state collapsed. I remember very well, I worked for the Moskovsky Novosti, the then frontline newspaper of Perestroika. And I was sitting in my office writing yet another piece about the KGB, and all of a sudden, I'm reading the news that Soviet Union no longer existed. I was, wow, really? Did you guys think to ask me whether I wanted my country to collapse or not? It was a real, last summer I was in Australia and I was interviewing one of the foreign ministers, Julia Bishop, and she asked me all of a sudden, she said, Yevgenia, how did you feel when Soviet Union collapsed? And I started thinking about this, that I felt very angry. I felt really angry. After all, that was my country. And I was Soviet citizen. And I had friends in Georgia. In fact, we got married in Georgia, but Georgia all of a sudden became another state. And I had friends in Ukraine. It was a real hard time, but for journalism, it was heaven. It was the best time of life. It was the time when private media popped up like mushrooms after the rain, as Russian saying goes. There were several media groups that were created by people who made money right at when it became possible to make money out of everything. They were making money out of everything. And, there is a great book written by Chrystia Freeland. She's now Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada. It's called Stealing the State. That's exactly what, Stealing the State, that's Solnik. And her book is Crime of the Century, or something like that. Anyway. So of course, these people were making money out of selling the Soviet property, but what was important, that they were ready to invest in media. They already realized that they needed, they have to work with the public opinion, and it's important to have different media. I don't want to say that media were totally free. Not of course. Each and every oligarch, whether it was Vladimir Gusinsky, he was the only one who made media as his business. He's the guy who created group Most, Bridge, and he created the best ever TV network in the country, MTV. However, you know, Berezovsky, oil, Potanin, Nariskniki, Khodorkovsky, they were all involved in different, in all other businesses, but they wanted to have media as a tool of influence. Of course, there was, you know, a small company which was created by mother and son, Irena Lesnevskaya. They were the people who, in 2006, bought the New Times, and which I brought several issues, you know, you will be able to see it later. There was a lot of regional media, very good. In each and every, back there were 89 regions of the Russian Federation. There were different local media. There were great TV too in the city Tomsk in the Ural Mountains. It was a great TV network with great independent, great investigative journalism. There has been created the first publishing house, independent media, by Dirk Sauer, a guy from Netherlands who came to the Soviet Union at the end of the Soviet Union and established the first glossy magazines. I remember when deputy head of Hearst Group, Green, Mr. Green, I don't remember his first name, he was trying to convince me to start publishing Cosmopolitan in Moscow. And I said, no, what are you talking about? You know, they know that cosmopolitan is a dirty word in the Soviet Union. Cosmopolitan. Of course, he had no idea what I was talking about. And of course, you know, cosmopolitan is how, you know, when Stalin started yet another assault on Jews back in early 1950s, you know, they were called безродные космополиты. Cosmopolites without, you know, I don't know how to translate it.
Rootless.
What?
Rootless.
Ruthless cosmopolitan. That, yeah. So, and I said, no, you know, it's not what I'm talking, you just don't understand. It's impossible to publish magazines under such name in Russia. Of course, a year from after that, you know, Cosmopolitan was coming with a circulation over million copies. And of course, on each and every cover, explain to you how to get orgasm quickly. So, in the country which was poor, we were so damn poor. You know, the budget, I remember that the budget of the state budget was the same as endowment of the Harvard University, where I just started doing my PhD. In 1994, Russian budget was $20 billion, and the same was endowment of Harvard University. So in this poor country, people were eager to read about the life that didn't exist under Soviet Union, which was totally unknown. Of course, it existed. You know, somehow we made babies, and some of us did it pretty well. But you know, it was it was all, you know, it was like, you know, sort of forbidden sphere. So 90s was the time when all this energy, creativity of designers, artists, writers, journalists, all this came about. It was an amazing time. Russia is a country of very talented people, as any country in the world is a country of very talented people. But you know, it had a lot of energy that was for long was under the pressure and concealed, and all of a sudden it came out. Not for long. where, I remember Jeff Sachs, one of those economists who conducted economic reforms in Poland and then was an advisor to Russian government. He said that if there is an opportunity to miss, then Russia is able to miss every opportunity. So we have, this sort of speciality. So in 1999, great minds decided to find a successor to the aging President Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was sick and drunk. He was sick because he was drunk, but he was also drunk because he was sick. In 1996, during the runoff on July 3rd, 1996, country voted for half-dead man. Yeltsin had both stroke and heart attack at this very day. There was one company that reported that news. It was Eileen O'Connor, CNN, and I'm proud to say that I was producer of this story. So since then, Yeltsin underwent very serious surgery, and he basically was unable to work. But on top of that, he was this binge drinker, and it didn't help. So beginning 1998, his close entourage, which is known as Yeltsin's family, started looking for the successor. And there were different names floating around, there was a decision made that the guy who's going to succeed should be Russian, better with a background in the military or in any other service, and somewhere around 50-year-old. So basically that was the parameters for Yeltsin's success. And yes, ethnically Russian, of course, religiously Orthodox. That was so. That's how they picked up Vladimir Putin, the KGB operative. First he became the head of the political police, FSB, then the prime minister in August 1999, and then on December 31st, 1999, Yeltsin announced that he was stepping down. And I remember my talk with the then head chef of the apparatus of Kremlin, Alexander Voloshin. I came to see him specially, and we were sitting in his office. I was talking, he was writing me replies on paper. Because the minute Putin came into Kremlin office, it became known that he bugged the majority of offices. He asked to bug the majority of offices. It was already known among his subordinates that boss wants to know everything. He's a control freak. And so, I told Alexander Stavich, what are you doing? You think that you're bringing just one KGB man into power. You're bringing corporation into power. And by then, I knew, this corporation pretty well. You're bringing the entire corporation, one by one, they will take over. No civilian organization is capable to control secret service, just none. Nowhere, anywhere in the world. And Voloshin wrote to me on a piece of paper, мы его полностью контролируем. He's under our full control. He wrote me on paper because he couldn't say it out loud. He knew that his office of the chef of that his office was bugged. That's what makes me sick. I understand that they're greedy. I understand that they're not very smart. I understand that they're lacking good education. All of them are very badly educated. But even they're lacking sense of self-preservation, for God's sake. So the first thing that Vladimir Putin did, he destroyed NTV. He put Gusinsky in jail, then released him. You know, he was frightened. Gusinsky was in Butyrki prison. He was frightened that he was going to sit in the cell with the HIV-infected guy, and this HIV-infected guy was going to rape him. So Gusinsky signed all the papers, escaped from jail. 3 days later, he was out of the country. He never returned since then. So, and then Putin, over the period of 10 years, he created his own oligarchs and also his own media companies, media groups. The most important of them was Channel 1. It used to belong to Berezovsky. Berezovsky was kicked out of the country and later committed suicide. There was state-owned VGTRK, it's Channel Russia, which had 80 TV stations in 80 regions, plus 5 nationwide TV networks. You have to understand, Russia is a very big country. Geographically, it's the biggest country in the world. It is 11 time zones. How many zones China has? 1, right? But Russia has 11. You know, we're always special. So there was created a pure propaganda tool to infect and influence your brains, which is Russia Today or T. It's a pure KGB creation. The guy who was creating this, was Mr. Gromov, who worked in the intelligence back in the Soviet times. But basically, it's difficult to find those who didn't serve in one or another department of the KGB. There was created NMG group, which was run by Putin's closest friend and advisor, the owner of the Bank Russia, Yuri Kovalchuk. He doesn't run it alone. I will show you, he has some people to help him. Basically, the market, the media market that we have now, beginning 2010 approximately, it's oligopoly. It is, it's controlled, this market is controlled by the small number of companies which set up prices and everything else. So the biggest owner is, of course, Russian state. It has Channel 1, which covers 98% all households across all time zones. The same is true with Russia and VGTRK, that's all state-owned companies. They have, these two are working outside Russia. This is a Moscow-based channel. That's Minister of Defense channel. There is also, news agency TASS. I don't understand how they do news because they're staffed with the intelligence guys who doesn't know how to write news. So, but somehow they're capable of doing this. It was exactly the same in the Soviet time, by the way. In the Soviet time, the rule of the game was that TASS had 3, so to say, journalists in any given countries, of which 2 were KGB guys and 1 was a writer because somebody had to write, right? So, Another big media group is run by Gazprom. Gazprom is it's the biggest gas company in the world, one of the biggest Russian treasures. It owns NTV, it owns different infotainment channels. It also, among other things, it owns Echo Moskvy, where I run my show. Yes. And that's National Media Group. Of course, this guy is very important. Yuri Kovalchuk led him. It is one of those who advised Patrushev and Kovalchuk. These were two people who advised Putin to annex Crimea. He runs behind the curtains, but he's one of the most important personalities in Russian backstage politics, Yuri Kovalchuk. Of course, with a KGB background. And this is Alena Kabaeva. Alina Kabaeva, gossip goes that she has 2 boys with Putin, but who knows, we know nothing. But she made an amazing career for somebody whose job was gymnastics. And besides satisfying the leader of the country, right? So I just love it. This is the most risky affair to write about Putin's private life, When we did a big investigation on Putin's elder daughter, we ran into huge trouble. They immediately created us, all kind of unpleasant fees, lawsuits, and etc. People who, there was a paper no longer existed, which wrote about, the time Kabaeva and Putin spent in Italy. Berlusconi used to host them all the time. Paper got closed, the editor of the paper had to emigrate. The guy who owned the paper, got into all kinds of troubles with his bank, and etc., etc., etc. It's a huge, well-known secret. So that's leftovers. That's what basically left. Not much. I divided those leftovers into 3 groups. These are Kremlin loyalists. These media outlets, they obey Kremlin censorship. There are known rules, some written rules, not the way it was under Soviets, but it's known. You cannot write anything critical about Putin. You cannot write anything critical about Sechin. You cannot write anything critical about FSB, political police as organization, and etc., etc., etc. There are those who are semi-independent. Novaya Gazeta, maybe many of you know, it was bought or it was just, by one of Putin's friends, Sergei Chemezov, who served with Putin in Dresden, in Residentura in Dresden back in 1980s. He's a former intelligence officer. Now he's the head of Rostech, the biggest industrial company, basically producing the majority of weapons for the military-industrial complex. Rostech has some 2,000 companies underneath it. Vedomosti was once the best national daily, was created by this publishing house, Independent Media, was the collaboration between Financial Times and Wall Street Journal. However, after annexation of Crimea, Russian authorities passed a law which prohibited foreign ownership more than 20% in any media in the country. Also, editor, general manager, and owner of any media cannot have dual citizenship. For instance, I have only Russian passport. I don't have any other passport. So Ведомости was sold. Wall Street Journal and Financial Times decided not to fight for it. And unfortunately, even though, they try to be more or less good, but it's difficult when it is severe pressure, because one of the things that, many people don't understand here is that ads are distributed. It's not that you get ads. It is that there are people in Kremlin, at the time when New Times was coming out on paper, it was Vladislav Surkov who was telling this bank, you give ads to say Izvestia, you give ads to say Komsomolskaya Pravda, and these guys, no ads, no ads. And those who were brave enough to give us ads ended up in exile. So unfortunately, it's a very strict rule that whenever any business would like to sponsor or to support that or another media, it has to receive permission from Kremlin. This is the rule of the game that exists in the organization like KGB. As I said, they are control freaks. They need to control everything. And therefore, they cannot allow that somebody gets ads or money from, and then from somebody who wasn't okayed, wasn't cleared by Kremlin. And here is, this here, you see, what basically left. These are all very small outlets except for Medusa. Medusa, the Bell and the Insider, they are run from outside Russia. Medusa from Latvia, the Bell basically from Berkeley, and the Insider from Latvia. So the only TV, it is an internet-based TV Rain, with 75,000 subscribers, and that's it. That's basically what is left. Of course, I just listed here, the ways how the kind of methods that have been used and still used by people in Kremlin, and the same is done all across the country in the local governments, in order to suppress whatever free voices left in the Russian media. Of course, there are all kinds of restrictive laws now that makes it's impossible to receive. For instance, it's not a big problem for me to get a grant in this country or in Great Britain, or, I will name you a couple of other countries. But I cannot do this because I cannot, the minute I receive foreign money, I'm dead. They immediately accuse you of being working in favor of the foreign interests, and that's it. Each Thursday or Friday, there is a meeting in Kremlin where they gather all the editors of the federal networks and publications, and they are told, news number 1 for this week, for the next week, news number 2, so many seconds for this speaking head, so many seconds for another speaking head. It is fully under control. And it's, I don't know if any of you watch Russian propaganda channels. It's impossible. Just, it's all about Ukraine. There are no news about Russia. There are all Ukraine, Putin and Ukraine. There are just two things. Putin, of course, is the best one can have, and Ukraine is, wow. Why they do this? Precisely the same way why they did it under Soviets. Because they're creating, convincing version of virtual reality. People, you think, oh, in the epoch of internet, people can go and get news. Unfortunately, we're well aware that a lot of studies done that people don't want to spend time on finding information on the web. Only those who really want to invest in information, they do this. Others don't. People don't want to spend time on that and resources. Besides, there is, yes, of course, you can find some information in Russian. Less and less people speak English, so English internet outside Russia is not reachable for many other people, many people. And of course, it's all about Putin's image. He is the guy who is a guarantor of social and political stability, and he's an ultimate problem solver, and that's why no criticism of Putin, he's like a god. Boy, and it's a pretty... Now I'm going to tell you once again, all of us journalists, we love to write about ourselves. That's what we do on a regular basis. Regardless what we write, we always write about ourselves, our own stories. So, okay. So, in April 2018, some retired KGB general decided to create me a couple of problems. And he asked the then Procurator General of the Russian Federation, to help him to create me a couple of problems. As a result, the New Times was fined at the amount of 22,250,000 rubles. That was the biggest fine in the history of the Russian media. Why? Because we didn't submit one cable to the regulatory agency, just one table. We submitted to all other agencies, that's for example, but there was, the fifth paper, fifth copy had to go to Roskomnadzor. And my accountant forgot to do it. So that was our fine. Of course, there was no way for us to pay that money. It was very interesting that the first court ruled in our favor, but then she was probably told that she didn't think through properly about her future. Therefore, in a week time, she ruled totally different, against us. And the same was with each and every level, with appellation court, and we went all the way to the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation, and currently our case is in the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg. However, I went on Dozhd, on this internet TV channel Dozhd, and said, guys, we need your help. In 96 hours, 18,000 people transferred us 27.5 million rubles. That was done in 96 hours. I was very happy to see that also my friends in this country also set up a website. Professor of McGill University, Maria Popova, set up a website. And they also, in a matter of several days, collected another $20,000. So the median donation was 600 rubles. It was less than $10. What's even more important, you will read through the numbers, you will see that the donations were very small. What's more important, that in order to make a transfer, people had to tell their first name, their patronymic name, and their last name. So it is as if they were coming to the FSB and they were telling, we're going to support this opposition magazine. And so these 18,000 people were brave enough to submit all their data. I was receiving information about each and every transfer on my phone, on my iPhone. My iPhone was working 24/7 virtually all those days, and I could see, and people were writing me from all around the country. From the beginning it was Moscow and St. Petersburg, and then from all around the country. Vladivostok with you, Komsomolsk-na-Amur with you, people in the east, in the north, in the Ural Mountains, in the south. It was amazing outpour of support. They were protecting us. It is what, something that should tell you about Russia, that these 30 years that passed since the Soviet Union collapsed, these years of democracy didn't go in vain. People learn one of the most important things in democracy, the tool to support each other, and that's what allows to form social capital, which is obviously prerequisite for the civil society. But the most important thing, the same situation that happened with us was repeated with respect to Ivan Golunov, the journalist whom Russian authorities police tried to frame and put in jail. And journalists went out on the streets and made Kremlin to back up and to release him. The same happened with Yegor Zhukov, the young activist, whom they were trying, one of the students in high school economics, they were trying to put him in jail for nothing for 3.5 years, and authorities once again had to back up. It is to say that in Russia, we see the emergence of the civil society, at least in big cities. We see it in Yekaterinburg, we see it in St. Peter, and of course we see it in Moscow. But the most important thing, what happened, that at the same time that Kremlin was creating this virtual reality on the Russian propaganda TV, creative young people moved to YouTube, and they started creating content on YouTube. Look, Yuri Dudь, he has 6.3 million subscribers, more than Channel One. He's 31 years old. Alexei Navalny, the leader of the Russian opposition, have more than 1 million subscribers. His investigation on the late PM Medvedev, who was fired just 10 days ago, was seen by 32.5 million YouTube viewers. Irina Shikman, Leonid Parfenov, once the famous TV presenter, and etc. Now, and we see the change. That's good news. I'm going to tell you now about that will be just good news, nothing but good news. Look at this data. You will see that TV remains to be the main source of, so to say, news, of information for Russian people, right? However, we also see that people, that amount of those who call TV as the primary source of information is going down. You see? It's going down, and the amount of those who are getting the information from the social networks is going up. But the good news is not yet here. Look at this. Look at this. In the age group 18-24 and 25-34, social networks, Facebook, Twitter, become the major source of information. Yes, there is already study done. I mentioned this publication at my literature list, that we do see that social networks promote populists in the democratic countries. However, in my part of the world, in authoritarian countries, social networks become the source of news as there is no other source or almost no other source. This is very important, that people, and of course you understand, that revolutions, they are made by young people. And young people are no longer consumers of the propaganda TV. So you see how radically social networks go up for the age group 18-24. And the same is with respect to the trust in the difference. So people in the older age group, they still trust TV. However, once again, young people, they trust TV less and less and less. So I told you about, and now look at what's going on with Putin's ratings. You can see, so the peak of Putin's ratings was in 2014. After annexation of Crimea, it was 84, 86%. The current Putin's rating is 47%. 47%. And it's not just, of course, people are getting tired, blah, blah, etc., but it's also the outcome of the social networks, YouTube, work of people like Navalny. Of course, the digital repressions, they're unavoidable. Of course, the Russian government is trying to create sovereign internet to cut us off the World Wide Web, and I spoke to some, specialists in cybersecurity in this country, and they told me that Russians are pretty good in that, and most likely they will be able to cut the country from the rest of the world. But we will prevail. Thank you.
We have half an hour or 25 minutes for Q&A discussion, and we have people here who are ready to take your questions. I would ask that you say your name briefly and that you ask a brief question, not a novel, and Dr. Albats will respond. So
I will just show you, this is the magazine that we put out right before elections of 2012 when Putin was returning back to Kremlin. He was, he was prime minister for 4 years. Dmitry Medvedev pretended to be a president, and then Putin was returning back. And that was we had a huge investigative piece here about his assets. And so that's, when we put out this cover, I received letters saying, please save me this issue, because obviously it's the last issue of the New Times. No, we survived for another 5 years.
So we'll take 3.
Okay.
Well, I have two concerns that arise from this. One is what lessons were taken from their experience in Russia that were used to intervene in the 1916 election in this country, and how is the United States represented through the media in Russia?
Excuse me, how is the United States?
How is the United States represented in the media in Russia?
We're going to take a couple more.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Sasha DeVogel. I'm a PhD candidate in political science. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more extensively about the recent constitutional reform that was announced last week and sort of what that means for the future, not only of the media, but of Russia in general.
Hi, Professor Albats. I am Jahal from your class. I have a question about the trend of the increasing significance of social media in the media realm of Russia. Because on one hand, it is for sure a democratization of information, but on the other hand, the contents produced on social medias are sometimes could be a little bit concerning because of because of its lack of fact check and things like that. So to what extent should we see it as a hopeful trend, and to what extent should we be more cautious about it because of the potential of circulation of myths, or that might lead to a exacerbated confrontation between the population and the government?
Cautious about, I'm sorry,
About
which medium do you have in mind?
social media.
So, okay.
And then, yeah, 3 at a time. We already have. Okay, Yevgenia, you can go.
Thank you very much for your question. So, that Trump is now a beloved president. What you're talking about? United States are constantly presented in the Russian propaganda TV. There is quite a little interest in Russia. Russia is becoming very, sort of close country. But there are regular news about impeachment, about Trump, and etc. Now, and of course, Russians are very proud that basically they are running the biggest power in the world. That we were able to elect our own president, and now on a regular basis we basically run the United States. So. Recent changes to the Constitution. It is a very, very significant topic. Unfortunately, the kind of coverage that I see here in the American media is it's painful to read. What happened is that for the first time, in a real serious manner, Putin introduced, as of now, 22 changes to the Russian constitution. As a result of these changes, president who in Russia is not the head of the executive, is not the head of the executive branch, president as the head of the state become the sole controller of the government, prime minister himself, president appoints his deputies, president appoints ministers, president appoints all procurators starting from the Procurator General in Moscow and all the way to the low-level procurators in the towns. President, through the upper chamber of the Russian Duma, appoints judges of the Constitutional Court. Of course, there's no longer any separation of powers, but who cares? President appoints judges. So it is amazing, in a way it is super mega presidential republic, and except for the fact that Russia is not presidential republic. It's a semi-presidential republic like it exists in France, for instance. Now, it is obviously a constitutional coup d'etat. I've been reading yesterday, and I've been, I was talking about this today on my show at Echo Moskvy. We know the case like that. It happened in Germany when Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party won elections on March 5th, 1933. It was the last alternative elections in the Weimar Germany. And still, he didn't have enough votes to have full control of Reichstag. he had to make the coalition with some small party. It doesn't matter. So 19 days after the elections, Adolf Hitler introduced the law that became known as legal dictatorship. In accordance with this law, Reichs-Chancellor and his government got the rights to introduce laws bypassing Reichstag on their own. So I would say that what Putin did, and that's the beginning, obviously, because there's also they're talking about the creation of some unclear body by the name Gossovет. It is a legal dictatorship. He is consolidating the most important instruments of control over the major institutions of the Russian state in his hands. Obviously, it's not just him. As I said, there is a corporation, there is a small Politburo by the name Security Council. From my perspective, they're trying to recreate the kind of system that existed under Soviets, the kind of system of governance, if for nothing else, but because back then they were young. And when we're young, we're capable to do a lot of things much better than we do, when we're no longer young. But also you have a feeling that back then everything worked. Soviet system was capable to control this huge country of 300 million people. That it was capable to be the superpower. It was capable to challenge the United States and the entire West. So my understanding, but it's just the beginning. Right now, we're at the very beginning, at the very start of this constitutional coup d'etat, and we're leading into this legal dictatorship. Unfortunately, I'm planning to write just in details, because when I read in New York Times that these amendments to the Constitution is turning Russia into parliamentary republic, I feel sick. When I listen to podcast of Georgetown University podcast, and a good friend of mine says that that there is more powers given to the Russian Duma, I'm getting sick. But the most important, that no one, neither the United States, no Great Britain, no France, nobody, no one leader said a word that there is a constitutional coup d'etat in this huge country with nuclear weapons by the name Russia. Now, Putin came out with an initiative to have a meeting of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations, which are, of course, United States, Great Britain, France, China, and Russia. It's perfect, of course, timing for the United States. You have elections, Great Britain Brexit, Macron dead afraid of Putin, is unable, he's just got frozen when he sees Putin. China has, its own problems. But the reason it's my hypothesis, Putin is doing this because he wants to sort of legitimize these changes, this coup d'etat. He wants leaders of the world to accept him as an equal and to say, oh, Volodya, aren't you good? And no one, said a word in your country, very good job. So it is so damn dangerous that I cannot even start thinking about this, I'm just, and I spent, quite several hours just reading through all these amendments to the Russian Constitution. This is Russian Constitution. It was published by Novaya Gazeta as a Red Book. You know what is a Red Book? Right. So the majority of articles not working here, but still, there are two important first chapters two first chapters that cannot be, these are the basics of the Russian state, which, and still we read here that individual is in the center of a Russian system, that no one can deprive individual from his freedoms and rights. It's very important part of our life. It's something that still gives us some freedoms. After all, they need constraints, So, among these 22 amendments, 2 has to do with the first 2 chapters that can be changed only by the Special Constitutional Assembly and referendum. However, this was passed at the first reading in the Russian Duma in a matter of 2 days. They even didn't discuss. All 422 members of the Russian Duma voted in favor of this. They're so dead afraid. I understand that, they were told that either you vote for or, face the consequences. And, members of the Russian Duma, they're millionaires and billionaires, So they have something, it's not like us, what you can take from me. But, they have islands, companies, banks, and etc. One of the very important articles, Article 15th of the Russian Constitution, it's about the self-governance. So they're making amendment to some, another article of the Russian Constitution by which they abandon self-governance. And they pronounce self-governance, municipal governance as part of the state bureaucracy. They, of course, because they are control freaks. They just you have to understand, these are almost 70-year-old KGB control freaks, which are just getting high, because when, they're capable to control everything from Moscow all the way to the ground. And there is another article that we had the priority of international laws over sovereign laws. That was very important because of the European Court of Justice, where many people, who couldn't get any fair trial in Russia, they addressed their grievances there, but no longer. They abandoned this as well. So other amendments, it's difficult. I did my PhD in bureaucracy. I know a thing or two about, the way it happens, how bureaucracies are organized. I don't understand the logic, except that they are trying to get into one fist all the major powers. Now, why are they doing this now? Why such a speed? What's going on? We don't know. Really, we don't know. But something is going on. Trust in social media. Listen, you can trust your loved ones. That's basically it. Everything else you're supposed to check. That's our job in journalism. That's our job in political science. Be my guest, go and check. On the web, we have plenty of data, and there is all the possibilities to check. You don't have to trust anyone. Okay, and I don't remember, there was question number 4, but I forgot to put it down.
We're going to take one more round, perhaps 2 if we have time, but I doubt it. So we have gentlemen here. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so you start.
Yeah. So my name is Ina Malitoris. I'm from former Soviet Union. And right now I work for Spring Arbor University. So my question is that Putin regime sooner or later is going to collapse. And what do you expect? Would we lose some regions of Russia? What is going to happen to Russia as a country? Should we expect any breakdown?
It's a good question. I used to think that Russia is going to break down along the Ural Mountains. Basically, Russian Far East is divorced from the rest of the country. You come there and they really don't care what's going on in Moscow, and for them it's much further than Tokyo. You know, it takes 1 hour to get from Irkutsk to Beijing, and it takes 6 hours from Irkutsk to Moscow. I don't know. The problem is that China obviously is not interested in these territories because they're empty, because the climate is awful, and if you look who is trading goods in the Russian funnel cities, you will see that these are not Chinese. Chinese are hiring people from Kyrgyzstan, first and foremost. They don't set up businesses because the property rights are very unclear in Russia. Therefore, they're afraid that they will start the business and then FSB will come and take it away. The pay that they can get in Russia is lower than it is in China. So there are some people from the northern China, but quite a few of them. But I don't know. I don't think that Russia will survive as such for much longer. I just don't understand how they're going to connect countries together.
So your publication remains one of the few independent media in Russia, as you showed. And you also demonstrated what happened to many of the people who owned bigger publications like in TV and things like that. So my question to you is very simple. Are you afraid, personally? I mean, did they threaten you? I mean, given this situation, aren't you afraid to do what you do?
Is there a third and last question? Okay, gentlemen here, and then there was another one, very quick. You can squeeze in the last one.
Thank you for your remarks, Annette. I'm Vincent Duffy. I'm the news director at Michigan Radio. I was just wondering if you could tell us, for media that's produced in the United States, in your opinion, which one is doing the best job of covering Russia? For those of us who want to know more about it, which one should we be paying attention to?
Okay.
Joshua Nicklin, just my question is, we see this collusion not only with Russia in itself, you were talking about American companies that aren't doing a great job of, or whether they're media companies or business companies that have an interest in protecting or continuing this propaganda. Do you see that beyond then just a Russia problem? We obviously see that where big businesses all around the world are consolidating power. So do you see it as more than just a Russia problem? Do you see it all over the world, or is most of your focus just with Russia and then how that's being taught or shown in the United States?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. That's what I always love questions from the foreign journalists. They come to me to Moscow and they're always afraid, why you are not killed? So there were attempts. Once they put a detonator underneath my car gas tank. Gas tank? Yeah. So, but thanks God, we found it before it blew up. My driver took the car. There was some problems with car, he felt. And he took the car to the service station. And when they put the car on, I don't know the language for that. They raised it. Yes, up. They found that there was a package. Inside the package there was telephone Nokia, and inside telephone Nokia there was plastid. Plastid? Or plastic. So, and it was управляемое. I'm sorry, I'm not good. Huh? Yes, this no, so there was all that had to be done was to send a signal to Nokia, and then, huh? You were lucky they didn't do it before. No, of course, I'm so happy, Sometimes your life is good. And I feel exactly like it. Listen, I have, I'm pretty fatalistic in that respect. There's nothing I can do about this. I made sure that my daughter is no longer in my country. And so when she was there, I was very concerned. As long as she was no longer there, what can they do? They can kill me. That's all they can do. I don't have money. I don't have property. I don't have islands, banks, or anything like that. So there is nothing they can take from me. But, it can happen, but maybe, I fasted for 25 hours during the Yom Kippur. Maybe, I got in the book of life, So anyway, there is no answer to your question, of course. Now,
Which media do you trust in the U.S. about Russia?
But I read the whole bunch of media, of course. I listen to National Public Radio each morning, regardless whether, I'm sorry, yes. Whether I am in Moscow or in Ann Arbor, I start my day with the National Public Radio. I am accustomed to National Public Radio when I was at Harvard and one. I read New York Times, I read Washington Post. While in this country, I watch Fox News on Sunday, 2 o'clock, Chris Wallace show. It is excellent. It's absolutely excellent journalism, even though it's Fox News. Chris Wallace is an absolutely great presenter. Yesterday he did a town hall with Buttigieg out of Des Moines. Okay. I'm going to Des Moines on Friday. So, of course. So, I also watch here George Stephanopoulos, ABC this week. I watch Face the Nation on CBS. I watch a little bit of CNN, but it's too biased to my taste. So that's what but I don't have time for anything else because, I have a hell of a lot of stuff to read. So but New York Times usually and Washington, they're pretty good. But unfortunately what happened, New Yorker, of course. New Yorker, I'm subscribed to New Yorker since 1996. And I get New Yorker burst on my phone and, and when I'm here, they send me the paper edition as well. I read Masha Gessen's whole columns on the web, and I read David in the magazine. I read Susan Glass in the magazine. I read names because I know all the people who are writing. Peter Baker, I trust him. I know him more because Susan Glasser, she's an excellent analyst. She's writing for the New Yorker now. She was the former founder and editor of Politica. So that's basically, I go not by the brand names, but by the names of the journalists whom I trust. Okay, yes, unfortunately we got probably, it looks like that we got into a liberal cycle. I'm afraid, I hate to think that in politics we have, some sort of cycles like in economics. And I'm afraid that we got into this populist liberal cycle, and we see what we see in France, in Great Britain. Unfortunately, Merkel is basically stepping down in Germany, and from my perspective, she's the only real statesman in Europe. The situation in the Netherlands, on the other hand, is better. So it is, there are countries in Europe which are still pretty liberal, but unfortunately, this populist wave is taking its toll across the globe. What else? I think I answered your questions. Thank you. Thank you.